Sherlock Holmes and the Poisoned Letter from Edinburgh. Chapter 1. The Envelope with the Black Seal. In the spring of 1894, London lay beneath a curtain of damp mist that seemed determined to obscure every street lamp and church spire from view. The city moved as if in a dream. Omnibuses emerged from the fog only to vanish into it again, while the distant rattle of carriage wheels echoed through the grey twilight like ghostly whispers. It was on such an evening that I found myself seated opposite Sherlock Holmes in the familiar sitting room of Baker Street. My friend was stretched languidly upon the sofa, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. A violin rested beside him, neglected for the moment, while several chemical apparatuses occupied the table near the window. Holmes had spent the better part of the afternoon conducting experiments involving tobacco ash, and the room bore unmistakable evidence of his labours. For my own part, I had been reading an article in the Lancet concerning recent advances in surgery. The silence between us was comfortable, as it often was. Without warning, Holmes spoke. "You have been considering whether Dr. Penrose's theory regarding antiseptic treatment possesses practical merit." I lowered my journal and stared at him. "Holmes, how could you possibly know that?" He smiled faintly. "My dear Watson, your astonishment remains one of life's dependable pleasures. You saw the article. I saw considerably more than that." He sat upright. "The page before you contains 3 columns. The article in question occupies the centre. During the last 10 minutes, your eyes have returned to the same paragraph no fewer than 6 times. Furthermore, your right thumb has been rubbing the margin of the page, a habit you display whenever you encounter an argument with which you partially agree but remain unconvinced." I laughed. "And from that you deduced the subject of my thoughts?" "Naturally." "Then I fear I am becoming transparent." "Not transparent, Watson, merely consistent." He reached for his pipe. "The world is filled with evidence. The tragedy is that most people prefer not to observe it." Before I could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." "His name?" "He would not give one, sir." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Show him up." Moments later, our visitor entered. He was a man of approximately 60 years, tall and remarkably thin. His dark overcoat appeared expensive but badly arranged, as though he had dressed in haste. Deep lines marked his face. More striking still was the expression in his eyes. I had seen fear before. This was something beyond fear. It was dread. The stranger closed the door behind him and remained standing. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" "At your service." The man glanced toward me. "This is Dr. Watson," said Holmes. "You may speak freely." The visitor hesitated. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. Even before he placed it upon the table, I noticed something unusual. The envelope bore a seal of black wax. Not red, not blue, black. Holmes noticed it at once. "A mourning seal," he remarked. The stranger nodded. "That is what I first believed." "You no longer do?" "No." Holmes leaned forward. "Please continue." The gentleman swallowed. "My name is Sir Alistair Fenwick." The name was familiar. Fenwick was a respected industrialist whose business interests stretched from London to Scotland. Newspapers frequently mentioned him among the wealthiest men in Britain. "I received that letter 4 days ago," he said. "From whom?" asked Holmes. "That is precisely the problem." Holmes carefully examined the envelope without touching it. No sender, none. No postmark visible. Exactly. I looked more closely. The surface appeared strangely clean, almost unnaturally so. "Was it delivered by hand?" I asked. Sir Alistair shook his head. "It appeared among my morning correspondence." "And the contents?" Holmes asked quietly. The man's face turned pale. "Read it." Holmes opened the envelope with deliberate care. Inside was a single sheet of cream-coloured paper. Across the page, written in dark ink, appeared only one sentence. 3 nights remain. The debt from Edinburgh must be paid. Neither Holmes nor I spoke. The words were simple enough, yet something about them produced an immediate sense of unease. Holmes turned the paper over. Blank. No signature, no date, nothing else. An anonymous threat, I said. Sir Alister laughed bitterly. I thought so too. You no longer think that? No. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Why? The answer came in a whisper. Because the morning after receiving it, my secretary died. The room became very still. Died? I repeated. Suddenly. Under what circumstances? He collapsed at his desk. Holmes folded his hands. A medical explanation was offered. The physician called it heart failure. You disagree? Sir Alister looked directly at Holmes. My secretary was 32 years old. Healthy? Perfectly. And there is more. Much more. Holmes nodded. I expected as much. The man stared. How? Because you are terrified, Sir Alister. A single anonymous threat would concern you. The death of an employee would alarm you. Yet, neither alone would produce your present condition. A faint tremor passed through the visitor. Then you see it. I see only fragments. Sir Alister reached into his pocket once more. This time he produced a small leather notebook. 2 days after my secretary died, my valet discovered this, hidden beneath the man's desk. He handed it over. Holmes opened the notebook. Several pages had been torn out. What remained consisted of scattered entries, names, dates, addresses, nothing immediately meaningful. Then Holmes paused, his eyes fixed upon one particular page. For the briefest instant, I saw genuine surprise cross his features. It vanished almost immediately. Yet I had known Holmes too long to miss it. What is it? I asked. Holmes closed the notebook. Later, Watson. Sir Alister leaned forward anxiously. Do you understand it? Not yet. Holmes rose and crossed to the window. For several moments he stared into the fog-covered street below. When he finally turned back, his expression had changed. The lazy indifference of moments earlier had disappeared entirely. The hunter had awakened. Sir Alister, he said, I shall accept your case. Relief flooded the man's face. Thank God. However, Holmes continued, before we proceed, I must ask a question. Anything. What occurred in Edinburgh? The colour drained from Sir Alister's face. He gripped the arm of his chair. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke. It happened 27 years ago. His voice had become barely audible, and I have spent every day since praying that no one would ever discover the truth. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Within Baker Street, a silence settled over the room. I sensed, though I could not yet explain why, that we stood at the threshold of one of the most extraordinary investigations of Sherlock Holmes's career. And neither Holmes nor I could have guessed that before the case ended, 2 more men would be dead, a fortune would vanish, and a secret buried in Edinburgh for nearly 3 decades would threaten some of the most influential names in Britain. The mystery of the poisoned letter had begun. Chapter 2. The Debt Buried in Edinburgh. The extraordinary declaration with which Sir Alister Fenwick concluded our first interview produced a profound silence within the sitting-room of Baker Street. Holmes remained standing before the hearth, his keen grey eyes fixed upon our visitor. A secret from 27 years ago, he repeated quietly, and one connected to Edinburgh. Sir Alister nodded. I have never spoken of it publicly, yet someone now wishes you to remember it. The industrialist wiped perspiration from his brow. That appears to be the case. Holmes resumed his seat. Then we shall begin at the beginning. The older man seemed reluctant. Several times he attempted to speak only to stop himself. At last he drew a long breath. In 1867, I was a student at the University of Edinburgh. Holmes inclined his head. A city renowned for producing excellent physicians and poor weather. Despite his obvious distress, Sir Alister managed a faint smile. That has not changed. Continue. There were 4 of us. The number is important? Very. Holmes folded his hands. Names, if you please. Alistair Fenwick, Malcolm Reed, Hugh Blackwood, and Nathaniel Kerr. Holmes glanced briefly toward me. I recognized none of them. Sir Alistair continued. We were young, ambitious, foolish. An unfortunate combination, murmured Holmes. We believed ourselves invincible. He stared into the fire. One evening, we became involved in an affair that should never have occurred. What sort of affair? I asked. The man's expression darkened. A financial matter. Holmes said nothing. I knew that silence often encouraged clients to reveal more than direct questioning ever could. It began with an investment scheme. A legitimate one? Holmes asked. No. Illegal? Sir Alistair hesitated. Not precisely. Which generally means yes. The industrialist lowered his gaze. There was a shipment. A shipment of what? I do not know. Holmes raised an eyebrow. You invested money into an enterprise without knowing its purpose. We were assured it was profitable. By whom? A businessman, named Elias Thorne. The name seemed unfamiliar. Holmes made no immediate comment. We each contributed funds, Sir Alistair continued, far more than students could reasonably afford. Where did the money originate? The older man's discomfort increased. Family accounts. Without permission? Without permission. Holmes nodded. A classic beginning to a disaster. Sir Alistair sighed. The shipment disappeared. Stolen? So we were told. And your money vanished with it. Exactly. Holmes tapped his fingertips together. You are omitting something. The man looked startled. How do you know? Because your secretary's death and the threatening letter cannot be explained merely by a failed investment. Sir Alistair stared into the flames. At length he spoke. When we confronted Thorne, matters became violent. I saw Holmes's eyes sharpen. Violent in what manner? There was a struggle. Between whom? Thorne and Nathaniel Kerr. What happened? The answer emerged as a whisper. Thorne fell. The room grew still. Fell? Holmes repeated. Down a staircase. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. Was he injured? I asked. Sir Alistair closed his eyes. He died. For several moments no one spoke. Finally Holmes broke the silence. Was Nathaniel Kerr charged? No. Why not? Because the authorities ruled it an accident. Holmes leaned back. Yet you do not believe it was. Sir Alistair's hands trembled. No. Why? Because I saw it happen. Holmes waited. Kerr pushed him. The words seemed to linger in the room long after they were spoken. You are certain? Holmes asked. Absolutely. Did anyone else witness it? Only the four of us. Then why was the truth concealed? Sir Alistair gave a bitter laugh. Because we were cowards. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. Explain. We agreed to remain silent. All four. Yes. And Kerr. He swore it had been an accident. You believed him? No. The industrialist's voice hardened. But none of us wished to face scandal. Holmes nodded slowly. So a man died, and four young gentlemen buried the truth. The accusation hung in the air. Sir Alistair offered no defence. At length Holmes spoke again. What became of the others? Reed entered banking. Living? Yes. And Blackwood? An architect. Living? Yes. Kerr? The industrialist hesitated. I have not seen him in nearly 20 years. Yet he vanished. Holmes's fingers stopped moving. Vanished. No one knows where he went. Interesting. Sir Alistair shifted uneasily. Do you believe Kerr sent the letter? I do not yet believe anything. The answer seemed to disappoint him. Holmes rose. Watson, fetch your notebook. I obeyed. When I returned, Holmes was examining the anonymous letter once more. The paper lay beneath a magnifying lens. What do you observe? He asked. I studied it carefully. Good quality paper. Yes. Expensive ink. Quite. I frowned. The handwriting appears deliberate. Holmes smiled. An excellent observation. Why excellent? Because it tells us something important. What? The writer wished us to believe he was disguising his hand. I looked again. The possibility had never occurred to me. Then the handwriting is false. Partially, Holmes pointed. Notice the capital letters. Artificial. Yet the spacing remains natural. He tapped the page. A man's habits can be hidden only with great difficulty. Sir Alistair leaned forward. You can identify him? Not yet. The industrialist's shoulders sagged. But soon. At that moment, Holmes picked up the small notebook discovered beneath the dead secretary's desk. The mysterious notebook that had briefly surprised him during our previous interview. He opened it again. This time he showed me the page that had attracted his attention. A list of names appeared there. Most meant nothing to me. One, however, had been underlined. Elias Thorne. I looked up. The dead man. Precisely. Sir Alistair stared. How is that possible? Holmes closed the notebook. A very good question. The industrialist seemed genuinely bewildered. I never told my secretary about Edinburgh. Are you certain? Absolutely. Holmes stood. Then either someone else did, or your secretary learned the truth independently. The latter possibility appeared to disturb Sir Alistair considerably. Why would he investigate a 27-year-old incident? That, Holmes replied, may prove to be the central question of the entire case. The following morning, Holmes and I accompanied Sir Alistair to his offices near Lombard Street. The building reflected the immense success of its owner. Polished stone, brass fittings, uniformed attendants. Yet beneath the appearance of prosperity I sensed unease. Employees whispered among themselves. Several cast nervous glances toward the room where the secretary had died. We were met by the firm's manager, Mr. Percival Hodge, a nervous gentleman with thinning hair and spectacles. He led us upstairs. The incident occurred here, he said quietly. The secretary's office remained untouched. Holmes entered without a word. For nearly 20 minutes he examined every corner. Desk, shelves, carpet, window, fireplace. He inspected them all with microscopic care. Finally, he knelt beside the desk. What is it? I asked. He pointed. A tiny stain marked the wooden floor, dark brown, almost invisible. Blood, I suggested. No. What then? A liquid. He produced a small instrument and scraped away a fragment. Interesting. Sir Alistair looked alarmed. You've found something. Perhaps. Holmes rose. Tell me, Sir Alistair, did your secretary drink tea? Constantly. Where was it prepared? The servants brought it. Holmes nodded. Then he turned toward the manager. Mr. Hodge, who discovered the body? I did. Describe exactly what you saw. The manager swallowed. He was seated at his desk. Alive? No. Anything unusual? The man hesitated. His face. Holmes immediately became attentive. Go on. It looked, yes, terrified. The room fell silent. Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. A healthy young secretary, a threatening letter, a notebook containing the name of a man long dead, and now a face frozen in terror. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to emerge, yet the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. As we departed the office, Holmes appeared unusually thoughtful. For nearly an hour he spoke hardly a word. Then, as our cab crossed Westminster Bridge, he suddenly sat upright. My dear Watson, yes? I believe our dead secretary was murdered. I stared. Good heavens. Indeed. But the physician declared heart failure. Holmes smiled faintly. Physicians are excellent creatures, Watson. I frowned. Speaking as one myself, I am uncertain whether that was a compliment. It was not. For the first time that day, genuine excitement entered his voice. Heart failure may explain death. He looked out toward the grey Thames. But it does not explain terror. And with those words, the mystery deepened considerably. For before the week was over, Holmes would discover that the secretary had not been the first victim connected to Edinburgh, nor would he be the last. Chapter 3. The Secretary's Final Investigation. The conviction with which Holmes declared the secretary's death to be murder remained with me throughout the journey back to Baker Street. Although I had learned long ago not to dismiss any conclusion reached by my remarkable companion, I nevertheless found myself troubled by the apparent lack of evidence. The young secretary, Mr. Arthur Bellamy, had collapsed alone in his office. No weapon had been discovered. No obvious poison had been identified. No signs of violence existed, yet Holmes appeared more convinced than ever. Upon our return to Baker Street, he retired immediately to his chemical table. For nearly 2 hours he subjected the tiny brown stain recovered from the office floor to a bewildering series of examinations. I occupied myself with my notes until his voice suddenly broke the silence. "Watson." "Yes?" "The stain is neither blood nor tea." I looked up. "What then?" Holmes carefully removed his spectacles. "A medicinal tincture." "Medicine?" "Of a kind." "What kind?" "I am not yet prepared to say." His expression suggested that he had already formed a theory, but lacked confirmation. That was often the case when Holmes approached the critical stage of an investigation. He possessed a remarkable ability to remain silent until every detail aligned with certainty. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard arrived shortly after breakfast. His compact figure burst through the sitting-room door with unusual energy. "Morning, Mr. Holmes." "Lestrade?" "Doctor." After accepting a cup of coffee, the inspector settled into a chair. "I hear you're involved in Fenwick's affair." "The news travels quickly," Lestrade snorted. "When wealthy men receive death threats, everyone hears about it." Holmes lit his pipe. "You have something for me." The inspector blinked. "How did you know that?" "Your right pocket contains papers. Your left contains no papers. Therefore the papers are important." Lestrade muttered something under his breath and produced a folded document. "You're an irritating fellow." "I have been told so." The inspector handed over the papers. "Background information on Bellamy." Holmes scanned them rapidly. "What did you discover?" Lestrade leaned back. "Not much. Bellamy was respectable. No criminal record, no debts, no known enemies. Family? Dead. Close friends? Very few." Holmes continued reading. Then suddenly he stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Ah." Lestrade frowned. "What is it?" Instead of answering, Holmes passed the document to me. One entry had been circled. During the previous 6 months, Arthur Bellamy had visited Edinburgh 3 times. I looked up. "Good heavens!" "Precisely," said Holmes. Lestrade appeared confused. "What does Edinburgh matter?" Holmes smiled. "Everything." The inspector groaned. "I knew you'd say that." Holmes stood. "Watson, fetch your hat." "Where are we going?" "The British Museum." Lestrade stared. "The museum? Indeed. What for?" "To investigate a dead secretary." The inspector sighed heavily. "I sometimes wonder whether you enjoy making ordinary conversation impossible." The morning was cold and overcast. A fine drizzle hung in the air as Holmes and I arrived at the reading room of the British Museum. For nearly 3 hours, Holmes immersed himself in newspapers, directories, business records, and university archives. I assisted where I could. At last he emerged carrying several pages of notes. "You have found something?" "A great deal." We settled at a nearby cafe. Holmes spread his papers across the table. "The key lies with Arthur Bellamy." "The secretary?" "Exactly." He tapped one document. "Bellamy's father." "What about him?" "He lived in Edinburgh." I frowned. "And?" "He died in 1868. The date immediately caught my attention. 1 year after the incident described by Sir Alistair. "Coincidence?" I asked. Holmes's smile suggested otherwise. "Continue." "Bellamy's father worked for a shipping company." My pulse quickened. "The same company involved with Elias Thorne." "Excellent, Watson." Holmes handed me another record. There it was, the name. James Bellamy, clerk, Edinburgh Shipping Consortium, the very organisation connected to the vanished investment scheme. I looked up. "You believe Arthur discovered this connection?" I am nearly certain of it. Holmes folded his arms. Imagine the situation. He began pacing, a young secretary sorting through old business documents. Yes. He discovers references to his father. Go on. He begins researching. Naturally. One discovery leads to another. Holmes's eyes brightened. And eventually he uncovers the forgotten death of Elias Thorne. The implications became immediately apparent. If Bellamy learned the truth, he became dangerous. To whom? Holmes stopped pacing. That is the question. We returned to Baker Street late that afternoon. There we found an unexpected message awaiting us. A telegram. It had arrived scarcely 30 minutes earlier. Holmes opened it. His expression hardened instantly. What is it? He handed it to me. The message was brief. Malcolm Reed, found dead this morning. Stop. Police request immediate assistance. Stop. For several moments I could only stare. Malcolm Reed, one of the 4 men involved in the Edinburgh affair. Another death, I said quietly. Holmes nodded. Exactly as I feared. Do you think it is connected? He looked at me. My dear Watson, if coincidence exists, it is currently working overtime. Within the hour, we were on our way to Reed's residence in Kensington. The house belonged to a wealthy banker. Uniformed policemen guarded the entrance. A local inspector greeted us immediately. Mr. Holmes, Inspector, thank you for coming. The man led us inside. What happened? We don't know. Cause of death. Apparently a seizure. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The similarity was impossible to ignore. The body remained in a study overlooking a private garden. Malcolm Reed appeared to have died while seated in an armchair. A book still rested upon his lap. At first glance there seemed nothing remarkable. Then I saw his face, and immediately remembered the manager's description of Arthur Bellamy. Terror. The expression was identical, frozen horror, as though death had arrived carrying something dreadful. Holmes examined the room with characteristic care. For nearly 20 minutes he said nothing. Then he stopped beside a writing desk. What is this? The inspector approached. A letter. Holmes picked it up. It was sealed with black wax. My heart sank. The same seal, I whispered. Holmes nodded. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. The message contained only 7 words. 2 nights remain. The debt grows larger. Silence settled over the room. Another warning. Another victim. Another link to Edinburgh. Holmes studied the letter closely. Then he surprised everyone by smiling. The expression seemed entirely out of place. You've found something? I asked. Perhaps. He held the page toward the light. What do you notice? I examined it carefully. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then suddenly I understood. There are indentations. Excellent. The inspector looked bewildered. What indentations? Holmes pointed. Faint impressions marked the paper. Words written on a sheet that had once rested above it. The marks were nearly invisible, yet under the proper angle they could be seen. Holmes's excitement increased. Someone wrote another message before this one. Can you read it? I asked. Not here. He carefully folded the paper. But I believe I can recover it. As we prepared to leave, Holmes paused beside the dead banker. His gaze lingered upon Reed's hand. Something protruded between 2 fingers, a tiny scrap of torn paper. Holmes removed it gently. Only 3 words remained visible. Not an accident. Nothing more. The rest had been ripped away. Yet the significance was undeniable. Malcolm Reed had been attempting to leave a message before he died. A message concerning events that had occurred 27 years earlier. Outside, evening shadows were gathering across London. As our carriage rattled toward Baker Street, Holmes sat in complete silence. Only once did he speak. Watson. Yes? The dead are beginning to talk. I looked at him curiously. What do you mean? His eyes remained fixed on the darkening street beyond the window. I mean, he replied quietly, that someone has spent 27 years trying to bury the truth. He touched the scrap of paper recovered from Reed's hand. And now the truth is fighting its way back to the surface. What neither of us realized was that before dawn arrived, a third black-sealed letter would appear. And this one would be addressed directly to Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 4. The letter addressed to Baker Street. I have often observed that Sherlock Holmes became most animated when confronted by an adversary of genuine intelligence. Ordinary criminals rarely interested him for long. Petty thefts, simple frauds, and commonplace murders provided little challenge to his remarkable faculties. It was only when he encountered a mind capable of planning several moves ahead that the full power of his intellect seemed to awaken. The events following Malcolm Reed's death awakened precisely that state. We returned to Baker Street shortly after 9 o'clock that evening. The weather had deteriorated considerably. Rain swept across the city in cold sheets, while gusting winds rattled the windows of our sitting room. Mrs. Hudson had prepared supper, though Holmes showed little interest in food. Instead, he immediately set to work examining the black-sealed letter recovered from Reed's study. Using powders, chemicals, and several instruments whose purpose I did not fully understand, he began attempting to recover the faint impressions hidden within the paper. For nearly 2 hours he worked without pause. Finally he leaned back. "Interesting." I looked up from my notes. "You've succeeded." "Partially." He handed me the sheet. At first I could distinguish nothing. Then, under the lamp's illumination, faint words emerged. Not complete sentences, fragments, pieces, yet enough to suggest meaning. He knew, the stairs, Thorn fell. Not an accident, my pulse quickened. Good heavens, Holmes nodded. Precisely. Reed was writing this? Most likely. I stared at the recovered impressions. The significance was obvious. Malcolm Reed had been preparing some form of statement, perhaps even a confession, and before he could finish it, he had died. Then Reed intended to reveal the truth. Yes, which means someone wished to silence him. Holmes smiled faintly. "You are progressing admirably, Watson." At that moment, a knock sounded below. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson entered. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes accepted it absent-mindedly. Then his expression changed. The envelope bore a black wax seal. Neither of us spoke. For several seconds, Holmes simply stared at it. Then he carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message contained only one sentence. "You are looking in the wrong direction, Mr. Holmes." Unlike the previous letters, this one carried a signature. Just a single letter. K. A chill passed through me. "Care," I said quietly. "Perhaps." Holmes examined the paper. "Or perhaps someone wishes us to think so." He placed the letter beside the others. 3 black-sealed messages. 3 warnings. 2 deaths. 1 forgotten crime. The pattern was becoming unmistakable, yet the identity of the sender remained elusive. "Do you find the message threatening?" I asked. Holmes chuckled. "No." "Why not?" "Because threats are emotional." He tapped the page. "This is strategic." "You mean the writer is attempting to influence the investigation by misleading you?" "Exactly." Holmes rose. "And that means we are approaching something important." The following morning began with a visit from Sir Alister Fenwick. The industrialist appeared considerably more distressed than during our first meeting. His face was pale. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. "I heard about Reed." "Yes," said Holmes. "You believe he was murdered?" "I do." Sir Alister sank into a chair. "Then it has begun." Holmes studied him carefully. "What has begun?" "The reckoning." The word hung heavily in the room. Holmes remained silent. After a moment, Sir Alister continued. "You must understand something." "What?" "We were not friends." "The 4 students?" "Not really." That admission surprised me. "Then why remain together?" "Because of what happened." Holmes nodded. "A shared secret." "Exactly." The industrialist clasped his trembling hands. "After Thorn died, everything changed." "How so?" We became suspicious of one another, because each knew the others were lying. Yes, Holmes leaned forward. And Nathaniel Kerr? Sir Alistair hesitated. He became obsessed. With what? The possibility that someone would eventually discover the truth. Did he speak of it often? Constantly? The industrialist swallowed. At times I thought he was losing his mind. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. Kerr began keeping records. What sort of records? Notes. About Edinburgh? About everything. Sir Alistair looked uncomfortable. He claimed evidence should exist. Evidence of what? The truth. That Thorne was pushed. Yes. The room grew quiet. This was the first substantial insight we had gained regarding Kerr. A man obsessed with preserving evidence. A man who later vanished. A man whose initial now appeared on threatening letters. The coincidence seemed almost too convenient, and Holmes clearly thought so as well. Tell me, he said, did Kerr ever marry? The question seemed unexpected. Sir Alistair blinked. No. Children? None. Close relatives? I am not aware of any. Holmes nodded slowly. Then, without warning, he changed the subject. What became of Elias Thorne's family? The industrialist appeared startled. I don't know. You never investigated? No. Interesting. Holmes stood. The conversation had clearly reached its conclusion. After Sir Alistair departed, I turned to my companion. You suspect Thorne's family? I suspect everyone. Even Fenwick, Holmes smiled. Especially Fenwick. That afternoon, Holmes disappeared. Such disappearances were hardly unusual. On numerous occasions he vanished for days while pursuing lines of inquiry invisible to everyone else. When he finally returned shortly before midnight, he appeared exhausted but triumphant. His coat was soaked with rain. Mud stained his trousers. Yet his eyes shone with excitement. Holmes! He removed his hat. Watson, where have you been? Everywhere. I sighed. A more specific answer would be welcome. He laughed softly. I visited 3 addresses. Whose? Former associates of Elias Thorne. Now I was fully attentive. And? Holmes removed a notebook. Elias Thorne was not merely a businessman. What was he? A blackmailer. The revelation astonished me. A blackmailer. An exceptionally successful one. Holmes spread several documents across the table. Thorne collected secrets. Why? Leverage. The answer was obvious, yet its implications were profound. If Thorne possessed damaging information, then many people had reasons to fear him, which means many people might have wished him dead. Precisely. Holmes sat down. For 27 years, everyone assumed Thorne's death resulted from a financial dispute. But it may have been something else, much more. He tapped one document. Several individuals paid Thorne substantial sums shortly before his death. I examined the records. The amounts were extraordinary. Blackmail payments? Almost certainly. A new possibility suddenly occurred to me. Then perhaps the Edinburgh incident had nothing to do with money. Holmes smiled approvingly. An excellent observation. I stared at him. You already considered that. Naturally. The implications transformed the entire case. What if the vanished investment scheme had merely concealed the true motive? What if Thorne had been blackmailing one or more of the 4 students? What if his death resulted from knowledge rather than greed? The mystery had suddenly become far more dangerous. For secrets inspire fear, and fear often inspires murder. The next morning brought yet another development. A telegram arrived from Scotland Yard. Its contents were brief. Hugh Blackwood missing since yesterday. Stop. House found deserted. Stop. No sign of struggle. Stop. I read the message twice. Then a third time. Hugh Blackwood, the 3rd surviving member of the group, said Holmes. Missing. Yes. I looked at him. You expected this. Indeed. Why? Holmes moved to the window. Because, Watson, our opponent is following a sequence. Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood. Exactly. Rain streaked the glass beyond him. The streets below lay cloaked in mist. For several moments Holmes remained silent. Then he spoke, and his words sent a chill through me. There were originally 4 men in Edinburgh. Yes, 1 disappeared. Kerr, 1 is dead. Reed, 1 is missing. Blackwood. Holmes turned slowly, which leaves only Sir Alistair Fenwick. The implication was unmistakable. If the pattern continued, Fenwick would be next. Yet something in Holmes's expression suggested a deeper concern. "What troubles you?" I asked. He looked toward the 3 black-sealed letters spread across the table. "Our adversary is clever." "Certainly, but not clever enough." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes picked up the letter addressed to him, the one signed with a single letter, K. Then he smiled, a dangerous smile. The smile he reserved for moments when he believed he had discovered the first genuine weakness in an opponent's plan. "I think," he said quietly, "our mysterious correspondent has finally made a mistake. And somewhere in London, at that very moment, a man who believed himself invisible was unknowingly drawing closer to exposure." Chapter 5. The Architect Who Vanished. The disappearance of Hugh Blackwood transformed what had previously appeared to be a sequence of mysterious deaths into something far more alarming. Until that moment, one might still have argued that coincidence played some role in the affair. Bellamy's death could have been natural. Malcolm Reed's demise might have resulted from an unforeseen seizure. Even the threatening letters, strange as they were, could perhaps be dismissed as the work of an eccentric mind. Blackwood's disappearance destroyed such explanations. By breakfast the following morning, every surviving participant in the Edinburgh affair had either died, vanished, or received threats. Everyone except Sir Alistair Fenwick, and Holmes had become convinced that Fenwick was in immediate danger. "I should like to speak with Blackwood's servants," Holmes announced. Half an hour later, we were seated in a cab bound for Hampstead, where the missing architect maintained a substantial residence overlooking a wooded slope. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the city. As our carriage climbed the winding roads, the houses became larger and more isolated. Blackwood's residence stood behind wrought-iron gates. A constable admitted us. The property itself reflected considerable success. Elegant stonework, tall windows, manicured grounds. Yet the atmosphere felt strangely abandoned. Inspector Lestrade awaited us inside. "You've chosen an inconvenient hobby, Holmes." "Investigating crime? Being right," Holmes smiled. "A burden I bear with humility." Lestrade grunted. "I've searched the entire place." "And?" "Nothing." "Then let us examine your nothing." The inspector rolled his eyes. "That is precisely the sort of remark that makes me regret inviting you." Blackwood's study occupied the rear of the house. The room reflected the habits of an orderly man. Architectural drawings covered one wall. Reference books lined another. A large desk stood near the window. Nothing appeared disturbed. "No signs of struggle," Lestrade reported. "No blood." No forced entry. None." Holmes nodded. Then he immediately walked past the desk and began examining the fireplace. I had long since learned not to question such seemingly irrational decisions. Within moments he crouched beside the hearth. "Interesting," Lestrade sighed. "What is it this time?" Holmes pointed. Several scraps of partially burned paper remained among the ashes. Most were destroyed beyond recognition. One fragment, however, contained a few surviving words. "He remembers, stares, cannot trust." The fragment ended there. Holmes carefully pocketed it. Blackwood was burning correspondence. Lestrade shrugged. "People burn papers every day." "Indeed," Holmes stood, "but they rarely vanish immediately afterward." That observation silenced the inspector. Holmes next turned his attention toward the desk. Several drawers stood open. Business documents filled most of them. Invoices. Contracts. Architectural plans. Nothing remarkable. Then Holmes discovered a hidden compartment. The mechanism was ingenious. A concealed spring released a narrow panel within the desk. Inside rested a small leather folder. Lestrade stared. "I searched that desk." Holmes smiled pleasantly. "I know." The folder contained several old newspaper clippings. Their dates immediately attracted my attention. Edinburgh, the very year of Elias Thorne's death. "Blackwood kept these?" I asked. "Apparently." Holmes examined them carefully. Most described shipping activity, financial disputes, business ventures. Then one clipping caused him to pause. The article concerned a coroner's inquest. Subject, Elias Thorne. Cause of death, accidental fall. Witness statements had been summarized. 4 names appeared: Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood, Kerr, the familiar quartet. Yet Holmes seemed interested in something else. "What have you found?" He handed me the clipping. At first I noticed nothing unusual. Then I saw it. One sentence had been underlined in red ink. "No evidence exists that Thorne was pursued before his fall." Holmes tapped the words. "Curious. Why?" "Because it implies the possibility was considered." I read the sentence again. He was correct. The article suggested investigators had once suspected Thorne had been chased. Someone feared this detail. Precisely. Holmes folded the clipping. "The question is why?" We spent the remainder of the morning interviewing servants. Most had little useful information. Blackwood had appeared nervous during recent weeks. He had received several anonymous letters. He had become increasingly secretive. Nothing surprising. Then Holmes questioned the gardener, a grey-haired fellow named Barnes. "What can you tell us about Mr. Blackwood's final day?" The man thought carefully. He seemed frightened. "Of what?" "Dunno, sir." "Did anyone visit?" The gardener hesitated. "One gentleman." Holmes became attentive. "When?" "Yesterday morning." "Did you see him clearly?" "Only briefly." "What did he look like?" The gardener frowned. "Tall." "Anything else?" "Beard." Holmes waited. "And?" The gardener shook his head. "That's all I recall." Ordinarily such a description would have been useless. Yet Holmes appeared thoughtful. "A real beard?" he asked. The gardener blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "A natural beard." The man looked confused. "I couldn't say." Holmes nodded. The answer clearly satisfied him. As we departed, I voiced the question occupying my mind. "You believe the visitor wore a disguise?" "Possibly." "Why?" Holmes smiled. "Because I would." Late that afternoon, we received unexpected news. A message arrived from Scotland Yard. Blackwood had been found, alive. The discovery occurred at a small boarding house near the docks. Within the hour, Holmes and I accompanied Lestrade to the location. The establishment stood among warehouses and narrow alleys overlooking the Thames. Its appearance was decidedly unimpressive. The proprietor led us upstairs. "He's in there." Blackwood occupied a modest room on the second floor. The moment I saw him, I understood why the police had summoned us so urgently. The architect looked terrified. Not merely frightened, terrified. His face appeared gaunt. His hands trembled continuously. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. For a moment I wondered whether he had slept at all. "Hugh Blackwood?" Holmes asked. The man nodded. "Mr. Holmes?" "Yes." Relief flooded the architect's face. "Thank God." He rose unsteadily. "You must help me." "We shall try." Blackwood looked toward the door, then toward the window, then back to Holmes. The behavior reminded me of a hunted animal. "He knows." Holmes remained calm. "Who knows?" Blackwood swallowed. "Care." The name seemed to drain all colour from his face. "You have seen him?" Holmes asked. "No." "Then why mention him?" "Because it has to be Kerr." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The reaction seemed genuine. Perhaps too genuine. "What happened?" Holmes asked. Blackwood lowered himself into a chair. 3 nights ago, I received a letter. The Black Seal. Yes. What did it say? The architect closed his eyes. Confess. The single word hung heavily in the room. Nothing else? Nothing. Holmes nodded. And then I began receiving more. How many? 4. Contents. Different each time. Blackwood's voice weakened, but always the same message, which was, "The truth is coming." Silence followed. Finally, Holmes asked the most important question. What truth? The architect stared at the floor. For several moments he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Elias Thorne did not fall." Neither Holmes nor I moved. The words carried immense significance. "You believe he was murdered?" Blackwood laughed bitterly. "Believe?" His eyes lifted. For the first time I saw genuine despair within them. I watched it happen. The room became utterly silent. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Who killed him?" Blackwood opened his mouth, then stopped. A peculiar expression crossed his face. Confusion, then fear, then astonishment. His hand rose slowly toward his throat. I sprang forward. "Blackwood!" The architect attempted to speak. No sound emerged. His eyes widened. The chair toppled backward. He collapsed onto the floor. I immediately knelt beside him. Years of medical experience guided my examination. Pulse, breathing, pupils. Every instinct told me something was terribly wrong. "Watson, it isn't a seizure." Holmes crouched beside me. "Poison? I believe so." Blackwood's fingers clutched desperately at his collar. His breathing became increasingly labored. He struggled to form words. One final message. One final attempt. His lips moved. Holmes leaned close. "What is it?" The dying man forced out 2 barely audible words. "The ledger." Then his body went still. For several seconds no one moved. The room remained silent, save for the distant sound of rain striking the window. Another victim, another witness, another fragment of the truth lost forever. Yet Holmes did not appear defeated. On the contrary, his eyes had become intensely focused. "The ledger," he repeated softly. Lestrade looked bewildered. "What ledger?" Holmes rose slowly. "I believe, Inspector, that our dead architect has just provided the most important clue of the entire investigation." And as he stared out toward the dark waters of the Thames, I sensed that for the first time since the case had begun, Sherlock Holmes was no longer merely following the trail. He was beginning to see where it led. Unfortunately, so was the killer. Chapter 6. The Hidden Ledger of Edinburgh. The death of Hugh Blackwood occurred so suddenly and under such extraordinary circumstances that even Inspector Lestrade, whose experience had hardened him against surprise, remained speechless for several moments. The architect had been alive one instant and dead the next. More importantly, he had died while attempting to reveal the identity of a murderer. As I completed my examination of the body, Holmes moved calmly through the small boarding-house room, his attention fixed not upon the deceased, but upon the environment surrounding him. That, I had learned, was often where the truth resided. "What do you conclude, Watson?" he asked. I rose from my knees. "Poison. You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without further analysis." Lestrade frowned. "But how could he have been poisoned? He was sitting here talking to us." "Exactly," said Holmes. The inspector threw up his hands. "That explains nothing." Holmes smiled faintly. "It explains quite a lot." He examined a teacup resting upon a nearby table, then another, then a glass of water. Each received the same meticulous attention. Meanwhile, I searched Blackwood's pockets. Among the ordinary contents of a gentleman's clothing, keys, coins, and correspondence, I discovered something peculiar. A folded piece of paper. "Holmes." He turned. I handed it to him. The paper contained a single line written hurriedly in pencil. "Find the ledger before Fenwick." Holmes read it twice. Then he folded it carefully. "Interesting. Blackwood wrote it?" "Almost certainly. Before his death?" "Very likely." Lestrade frowned. "Who is Fenwick?" "The man who hired us," I reminded him. The inspector looked astonished. "You suspect him?" Holmes placed the note into his pocket. "My dear Lestrade, At present, I suspect nearly everyone. The journey back to Baker Street passed in thoughtful silence. Rain lashed the carriage windows, while London disappeared beneath a veil of darkness. At length I spoke. "Do you believe Blackwood intended to warn us about Fenwick?" "I believe he intended to warn us about something. That's not the same thing." "Precisely." Holmes lit his pipe. "The distinction is important." I waited. After a moment he continued. "Observe the wording." He withdrew the note. "Find the ledger before Fenwick." "Yes." "He does not say beware of Fenwick." "No." "He does not accuse Fenwick." "True." Holmes leaned back. "He merely implies urgency." I considered the matter, because Fenwick might find it first. "Exactly. And if he found it first," Holmes exhaled smoke toward the ceiling, "the ledger might disappear." The possibility troubled me. By now, 2 men connected to the Edinburgh affair were dead. A third had vanished and then died, before revealing everything he knew. If a ledger existed, a document apparently important enough to inspire murder, it might contain the very answers we sought. The question remained, what ledger? Upon arriving at Baker Street, Holmes immediately shut himself inside our sitting room. For hours he surrounded himself with newspapers, records, maps, and notes accumulated throughout the investigation. I retired shortly after midnight. When I descended the following morning, I discovered Holmes exactly where I had left him. He had not slept. The signs were unmistakable. Yet his eyes gleamed with energy, a dangerous energy, the sort that appeared only when he approached a major breakthrough. "You have discovered something." "I have." "What?" Holmes handed me a newspaper clipping. The date read October 1867. The article concerned a commercial dispute in Edinburgh. Most of it seemed irrelevant. Then I noticed a name, Elias Thorne. What am I looking at? The final paragraph. I read carefully. Following the death of Mr. Elias Thorne, several business documents remain unaccounted for. Authorities believe certain company records may have been removed prior to the investigation. I looked up. The records. The missing records. The ledger? Holmes nodded. Very likely. Excitement began to build within me. If those records survived, they may reveal what Thorne was truly doing. Blackmail. Perhaps. Holmes rose and crossed to the window. Or something even more dangerous. At 11 o'clock that morning, we received a telegram from Edinburgh. It came in response to inquiries Holmes had dispatched days earlier. He read it quickly, then smiled. "Excellent. What is it?" "The university archives have located references to Thorne's business office. And there is a surviving inventory." "Of what?" "The contents seized after his death." My pulse quickened. "Does it mention the ledger?" Holmes handed me the telegram. One line had been underlined. "Private account book unrecovered." I stared. The ledger existed, indeed, and was never found. Holmes folded the telegram. "Until now, perhaps." The implication was obvious. Someone had hidden the ledger after Thorne's death. Someone who understood its importance. Someone connected to the events in Edinburgh. 2 days later, Holmes and I travelled north. The railway journey to Edinburgh consumed much of the day. By evening, the ancient city rose before us, beneath a sky of low clouds and fading light. Even after many years, Edinburgh possessed a distinctive character unlike any other city in Britain. Its steep streets and towering stone buildings seemed to emerge directly from history itself. Holmes appeared unusually attentive as our cab climbed toward the old town. "Remarkable." "What is?" "The geography." I looked around. "The geography?" "Yes." He pointed toward the narrow lanes winding between ancient structures. "A city of concealment." I laughed. "That sounds like something from one of your monographs." "It happens to be true." The following morning we visited the site where Elias Thorne had died. The building still stood. Though altered by time, its essential structure remained unchanged. A merchant occupied it now. After obtaining permission, Holmes spent nearly an hour examining staircases, corridors, and entrances. At last we reached the staircase itself. the place where Thorn had supposedly fallen. Holmes stood motionless. His gaze travelled from the upper landing to the stone floor below, then back again. "What do you see?" I asked. He remained silent. Several moments passed. Finally he spoke. "Watson." "Yes?" "Sir Alistair lied." I stared. "Lied?" "Yes." "About what?" "The struggle." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" Holmes pointed. "The staircase is too narrow." I looked carefully. He was correct. The space permitted little movement. Certainly not the violent confrontation previously described. "You believe his account was false?" "I know it was." Holmes climbed the stairs slowly. Then he stopped near the top. His expression changed. A faint smile appeared, the smile of discovery. "What is it?" Without answering, he crouched beside the wall. His fingers traced the stonework. Then he pressed against a particular section. A soft click echoed through the stairwell. Part of the panel shifted. I could scarcely believe my eyes. A hidden compartment. Holmes opened it carefully. Inside rested a small object wrapped in oilcloth. Neither of us spoke. The package appeared ancient. Dust covered its surface. Holmes removed it gently. Then he unfolded the cloth. Within lay a leather-bound ledger. For several seconds we simply stared. After 27 years, the missing ledger had been found. We returned immediately to our hotel. Only after locking the door did Holmes place the book upon a table. The leather had darkened with age. Several pages appeared damaged, yet most remained intact. Holmes opened it carefully. The first entries seemed ordinary enough. Financial transactions, shipping records, business expenses. Then the nature of the book changed. Names appeared. Dozens of names. Beside each stood detailed notes, private information, scandals, debts, affairs, criminal activities. I looked up sharply. "Good Lord." Holmes nodded. "It is exactly what I feared. The ledger was not a business record. It was a catalogue of secrets, a blackmail register, every victim carefully documented, every vulnerability recorded, every payment noted. The scale of it was astonishing. Elias Thorne had been blackmailing influential individuals across Britain, politicians, businessmen, judges, aristocrats. The list seemed endless. Then Holmes turned another page. Suddenly he stopped. His expression hardened. "What is it?" He pointed silently. I followed his finger. There, among the entries, appeared 4 familiar names: Alistair Fenwick, Malcolm Reed, Hugh Blackwood, Nathaniel Kerr. Beneath them was a 5th, a name neither of us had encountered before: Dr. Samuel Bellamy. My heart skipped. "Bellamy, the secretary's father," Holmes said quietly. The room fell silent. For the first time, the connection became unmistakable. Arthur Bellamy had not stumbled upon the mystery by accident. His father had been directly involved, directly connected to Thorne, directly connected to the ledger. And then Holmes noticed something even more disturbing. A page had been torn out. Not recently, long ago. Yet the missing section had occupied precisely the place between Bellamy's entry and the names of the 4 students. Someone had removed it deliberately. Someone who feared what it contained. Holmes closed the ledger slowly. His eyes had become very grave. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me. "We have been asking the wrong question." "What question?" "Who killed Elias Thorne?" I frowned. Then what should we ask? Holmes's answer sent a chill through me. We should ask who was with Thorne before he died. Outside, Edinburgh's church bells echoed across the evening mist. Inside our hotel room lay a ledger capable of destroying reputations, exposing secrets, and perhaps explaining a chain of murders spanning nearly 3 decades. And somewhere in London, another player in the game was almost certainly searching for the same book. A player who would soon discover that Sherlock Holmes had found it first. Chapter 7. The Torn Page. The discovery of Elias Thorne's ledger marked a turning point in the investigation. For weeks we had been pursuing shadows, anonymous letters, half-remembered events, frightened witnesses, and fragments of a secret buried nearly 3 decades earlier. Now, for the first time, we possessed a document created by the dead man himself, and it was immediately apparent that the ledger contained far more than mere financial records. It was a weapon, a carefully maintained arsenal of secrets capable of ruining some of the most influential figures in Britain. Yet despite its importance, Holmes appeared less interested in what remained within the book than in what had been removed from it. The torn page, the missing section, the deliberate gap between Dr. Samuel Bellamy's entry and those relating to Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood and Kerr. Throughout the evening, Holmes returned repeatedly to that portion of the ledger. At last he closed the book and sat silently beside the hotel window. Edinburgh lay beneath a blanket of mist. Church spires emerged faintly through the darkness. Far below, carriage lamps drifted like wandering stars through the narrow streets. "What troubles you?" I asked. Holmes remained thoughtful. "Absence. Absence. The most important evidence in this case consists of what is missing." I smiled. "That sounds like one of your paradoxes." "It is merely observation." He leaned back. "The torn page, the vanished records, the incomplete testimonies." His fingers tapped the arm of the chair. "Everything points toward concealment." "By whom?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That is the question which continues to evolve." I had learned enough about my companion to recognize such remarks as signs of progress. Whenever Holmes became cryptic, it usually meant he was approaching a conclusion. The following morning began with a visit to the Edinburgh archives. The facility occupied part of an old municipal building whose stone walls seemed almost as ancient as the city itself. An elderly archivist greeted Holmes warmly. "I received your telegram, Mr. Holmes." "Excellent. You wish to examine records from 1867. "Precisely." For several hours we searched through inquest reports, police files, newspaper collections, and business documents. Most provided little new information. Then Holmes discovered something interesting. A witness register, the document related to the investigation following Thorne's death. He spread it across the table. "What do you see, Watson?" I examined the page. 4 names immediately stood out. Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood, Kerr. The same individuals who had appeared repeatedly throughout the case. Nothing unusual. "Look again." I studied the register more carefully. Then I noticed it. A blank line, positioned directly beneath the 4 names. The line had not been crossed out, nor had it been erased. Instead, a name appeared to have been removed entirely. The paper itself showed faint signs of scraping. Someone altered the record. Exactly. Holmes's eyes brightened. A 5th witness. The realization struck me instantly. The same 5th person connected to the torn page. Very likely. Who was it? Holmes folded the register. That is what someone has spent 27 years preventing us from discovering. That afternoon, Holmes pursued a line of inquiry which at first seemed entirely unrelated. He visited several old legal offices, then a retired magistrate, then the descendants of a clerk who had worked on the original investigation. By evening, I found myself struggling to understand the purpose of these visits. Only after dinner did Holmes explain. The investigation into Thorne's death ended unusually quickly. How quickly? 3 days. I stared. 3 days? Precisely. Even by Victorian standards, such speed seemed remarkable, especially in a case involving a suspicious death. Why? Holmes smiled. An excellent question. He removed several notes from his pocket. The authorities accepted the accident theory almost immediately, without serious examination. Almost none. That troubled me. Someone influenced the inquiry. Very possibly. Holmes tapped the papers. The more interesting question is who benefited. I considered the matter. Fenwick? Perhaps. Blackwood? Possibly. Kerr? Conceivably. Holmes shook his head. Yet none of them possessed significant influence at the time. The point was valid. They had merely been students, young men with limited power, certainly not individuals capable of directing official investigations, which suggested another possibility. There was someone else. Holmes smiled. Exactly. The following day produced the first genuine breakthrough. It arrived unexpectedly. While examining old university enrollment records, Holmes suddenly froze. I recognized the expression immediately. Discovery. What is it? Instead of answering, he handed me a page. Several names had been circled. Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood, Kerr, and one more. Professor Adrian Faulkner. I frowned. Who was he? A lecturer. Connected to the students. Very much so. Holmes pointed toward the document. He supervised them. The significance was not immediately obvious. Then Holmes produced another record. This one concerned Elias Thorne. My pulse quickened. Thorne and Faulkner had belonged to the same private society. I looked up sharply. They knew each other. Yes. And the students knew Faulkner. Exactly. For several moments I simply stared. A new figure had entered the mystery. A man connected to both sides. A bridge between Thorne and the four students. And, perhaps, the mysterious fifth witness. That evening Holmes located something even more remarkable. A surviving diary. The volume had belonged to a university porter. Ordinarily, such a discovery would have held little significance. Yet one entry immediately attracted Holmes's attention. The date matched the night of Thorne's death. The porter described seeing 5 men enter the building shortly before midnight. Not 4, 5. The entry continued. The older gentleman appeared angry. The younger fellows followed him upstairs. Considerable shouting was heard shortly afterward. I looked at Holmes. The older gentleman. He nodded. Professor Faulkner. It must be. Almost certainly. The implications were immense. For 27 years, everyone had believed 4 students confronted Thorne. In reality, there had been 5 participants, and the oldest among them possessed direct connections to the victim. The hidden witness was finally emerging from the shadows. We spent much of the night reviewing everything we had learned. By midnight, Holmes had spread documents across every available surface in our room. The ledger, the witness register, the diary, the newspaper reports. Each represented part of a larger pattern, yet the pattern remained incomplete. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, Holmes suddenly rose. Without a word, he crossed to the ledger, his gaze fixed upon the torn section. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, the sort that appeared only when a puzzle finally yielded its secret. You've reconstructed it, part of it. Who was on the missing page? Holmes remained silent for several moments. Then he answered, Professor Adrian Faulkner. I stared. You are certain? As certain as one can be before obtaining final proof. The revelation felt almost inevitable. Yet another question immediately arose. Why remove his name? Holmes's expression darkened. Because Faulkner was more important than anyone realized. He turned another page of the ledger. Several entries referenced payments, meetings, threats, all connected to Faulkner. Then Holmes pointed toward a notation written in Thorne's hand. Faulkner knows everything, nothing more, just 4 words. Yet they carried extraordinary weight. Everything? I whispered. Apparently, Holmes closed the ledger, and that is precisely why someone wished his name forgotten. The following morning brought shocking news. A telegram awaited us at breakfast. It had been forwarded from London. Holmes read it once, then a second time. The expression on his face became very grave. What is it? He handed me the message. The contents were brief. Sir Alistair Fenwick, attacked last night. Stop. Survived. Stop. Requests immediate return. Stop. For several seconds I could only stare. An attack. Yes, the killer has moved again. Holmes folded the telegram. Or perhaps the victim has. I looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Holmes rose. We leave for London immediately. His tone left no room for discussion. Within an hour, we were aboard a southbound train. As Edinburgh disappeared behind us, I found myself reflecting upon the strange path the investigation had taken. We had begun with a poisoned secretary and an anonymous letter. Now we possessed evidence of a hidden witness, a missing ledger, a blackmail operation, and an attempted murder. Yet, despite all we had learned, the identity of the killer remained uncertain. Only one thing seemed clear. The mystery no longer centered solely upon Elias Thorne. It centered upon Professor Adrian Faulkner, a man whose name had been erased from history. A man who, according to Thorne's own notes, knew everything. And as our train thundered south toward London, neither Holmes nor I suspected that Professor Faulkner's connection to the case was far stranger and far more personal than anyone had imagined. Chapter 8. The Professor Who Knew Everything. The railway journey from Edinburgh to London afforded Holmes several uninterrupted hours for reflection. Ordinarily, long journeys encouraged conversation between us. On this occasion, however, my companion remained absorbed in thought. The ledger rested upon the seat beside him. From time to time he would open it, study a particular page, and then return to silent contemplation. Outside the carriage window, the Scottish countryside gradually gave way to the industrial towns of northern England. Yet Holmes seemed scarcely aware of the changing landscape. His mind remained fixed upon the mystery, specifically upon Professor Adrian Faulkner, the forgotten fifth witness, the man whose name had been erased from records, removed from the ledger, and seemingly omitted from every official account of Elias Thorne's death. At length I broke the silence. "You believe Faulkner is the key?" Holmes glanced up. "I do. More important than Fenwick?" "Yes." "More important than Kerr?" "Considerably." I considered this. "Then why has no one mentioned him?" A faint smile touched Holmes's lips. "Because someone worked very hard to ensure that no one would." The answer only deepened my curiosity. We arrived at Baker Street shortly after sunset. A telegram awaited us. Sir Alistair Fenwick requested an immediate meeting. Holmes agreed at once. Within an hour, the industrialist arrived. The sight of him startled me. His condition had deteriorated significantly. A bandage covered part of his forehead, bruising darkened one side of his face. Most alarming of all was the expression in his eyes, fear, not the anxiety of a man receiving threats, the terror of a man who believed death stood very close indeed. "Tell us exactly what happened," Holmes said. Fenwick lowered himself into a chair. "I was returning home." "At what time?" "Approximately 10 o'clock. And then," the industrialist swallowed, "I heard footsteps." "Behind you?" "Yes." "Did you turn?" "No." "Why not?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "Because I already knew." Holmes remained silent. "I knew someone was following me." "How?" Fenwick hesitated. "Instinct." The answer clearly failed to satisfy Holmes. Nevertheless, he continued. "What happened next?" "I reached my gate." Fenwick touched the bandage. "Something struck me." "From behind?" "Yes." "You lost consciousness?" "For several minutes." "And when you awoke?" The industrialist withdrew a folded piece of paper from his pocket. The same thing. Another black-sealed letter. Holmes accepted it. Inside appeared only 4 words. "The professor remembers everything." Silence settled over the room. I felt a distinct chill. For the first time, the letters referred directly to Professor Faulkner. Not Thorne, not Edinburgh, not debts. Faulkner. Holmes read the message twice, then carefully placed it beside the previous letters. "Interesting." Fenwick stared. "Interesting?" "Very." The industrialist appeared frustrated. "I was nearly killed." "Perhaps." "Perhaps." Holmes folded his hands. "Tell me, Sir Alistair, when was the last time you saw Professor Faulkner?" The question struck the industrialist like a physical blow. His face drained of colour. For several seconds he could not speak. "You know about Faulkner." "I do." The older man closed his eyes. "Then everything is lost." "No." Holmes's voice remained calm. "Everything is merely becoming clearer." After Fenwick departed, Holmes remained unusually thoughtful. At length he retrieved the ledger. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Relationships. Between whom?" "Everyone." He opened the book to a page I had not previously examined. Several entries concerned Professor Faulkner. Most were cryptic. Dates, meetings, references. Then Holmes pointed toward a particular notation. "AF guarantees silence." I frowned. "What does it mean?" "It means Faulkner acted as an intermediary." "Between whom?" Holmes closed the ledger. "That is precisely what I intend to discover." The following morning, Holmes launched one of the most exhaustive inquiries I had ever witnessed. He dispatched telegrams, visited libraries, consulted university records, interviewed retired academics, examined legal archives. By evening, he possessed an impressive collection of notes. More importantly, he possessed a theory. We sat together in Baker Street, while rain tapped gently against the windows. At last Holmes spread his findings upon the table. Professor Adrian Faulkner was not merely a lecturer. No, he was a guardian. I frowned. A guardian? Legally appointed. To whom? Holmes slid a document toward me. The answer startled me. Nathaniel Kerr. For several moments I simply stared. Kerr. Yes. The revelation altered everything. Professor Faulkner had not merely known the students. He had exercised direct authority over one of them. Why was Kerr under his guardianship? Holmes pointed toward another document. Kerr's parents died when he was young. I nodded slowly. And Faulkner raised him. Precisely. The implications were profound. If Faulkner and Kerr shared such a close relationship, then the mystery surrounding Kerr's disappearance acquired an entirely new dimension. Good heavens. Quite. Holmes lit his pipe. Now consider the situation. I waited. Faulkner knew Thorne. Yes. He raised Kerr. Yes. He was present on the night Thorne died. Yes. Holmes leaned forward, and then his existence vanished from every official record. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone had erased him deliberately. Late that evening, Holmes made a discovery, even more remarkable. It emerged from a series of old financial records. The documents revealed transactions between Thorne and Faulkner stretching back several years before the fatal incident. Not ordinary transactions. Payments. Large payments. Regular payments. I examined the figures. Blackmail. Holmes nodded. Almost certainly. But Thorne was blackmailing Faulkner. That would be the obvious conclusion. You disagree. Entirely. His certainty surprised me. Why? Holmes tapped the ledger. Because Thorne recorded payments received from his victims. Yes. Yet these payments never appear here. I considered the matter. Then understanding dawned. The money moved in the opposite direction. Exactly. Faulkner paid Thorne, or financed him. The room fell silent. A disturbing possibility emerged. What if Thorne worked for Faulkner? Holmes smiled. Excellent, Watson. I felt a surge of excitement. If Faulkner gathered secrets, then Thorne could exploit them. And share the profits. Precisely. For the first time, the structure of the blackmail operation became visible. Thorne may not have been its mastermind at all. He may merely have been its public face. The true architect could have been Faulkner, a respected academic hidden behind respectability. The possibility was both ingenious and sinister. The following day produced the most startling revelation yet. A messenger delivered a small package to Baker Street. No sender appeared. Inside rested an old photograph. Holmes examined it carefully, then handed it to me. The image showed 5 men standing together. Fenwick, Reed, Blackwood, Kerr, and Faulkner. The photograph appeared to have been taken shortly before Thorne's death, yet something else immediately caught my attention. A sixth figure stood partially visible at the edge of the frame. Only part of a face could be seen. A young man, no more than 20. I pointed. "Who is that?" Holmes studied the image. For the first time in many days, genuine astonishment appeared on his face. "What is it?" I asked. Instead of answering, he crossed rapidly to the ledger. Pages turned. Notes were examined. Dates compared. Then he looked up. "Impossible." The word carried unusual weight. "Holmes?" He held the photograph toward the light. "The sixth figure." "Yes." "It shouldn't be there." I stared. "What do you mean?" Holmes's expression had become intensely focused, because according to every surviving record, that man was already dead. A chill passed through me. Dead? Several weeks before this photograph was taken. The implications were extraordinary. Either the records were wrong, or someone had falsified them. And if someone had falsified a death nearly 30 years earlier, then the foundations of the entire mystery might be unstable. That night, Holmes finally revealed the conclusion toward which his thoughts had been moving. We sat beside the fire while London disappeared beneath fog. "Watson." "Yes?" "Our investigation has reached a critical stage." "Because of the photograph?" "In part." He rose. "And because I now know how the killer operates." My pulse quickened. "You do?" "Yes." "Who is it?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not yet," I groaned. "You know and refuse to tell me." "I know enough." He moved toward the window. Outside, Baker Street lay quiet beneath the mist. "I require proof." "How do you intend to obtain it?" For several moments he remained silent. Then he answered, "By giving the murderer exactly what he wants." I stared. "The ledger." Holmes nodded. "Precisely." Understanding dawned. "You intend to use it as bait." His smile widened. "Now you are thinking like a detective." I felt both excitement and concern. "That sounds dangerous." "It is. Extremely dangerous." "Almost certainly." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The best traps usually are." And as he stood watching the fog drift across Baker Street, I realized that the investigation had entered its final and most perilous phase. For somewhere in London, a murderer was searching desperately for the ledger, and Sherlock Holmes intended to ensure that the murderer found it. Chapter 9. The Trap at Baker Street. The announcement of Sherlock Holmes's plan filled me with considerable unease. During our long association, I had witnessed him place himself in danger on numerous occasions. He had confronted armed criminals, infiltrated violent gangs, and ventured alone into circumstances from which most reasonable men would have retreated immediately. Yet there was something particularly unsettling about the trap he now proposed. Unlike many previous cases, we faced an adversary who had already demonstrated patience, intelligence, and ruthlessness. 3 men were dead. Another had narrowly survived an attack. A trail of deception stretched backward nearly 3 decades. And somewhere within that web of secrets lurked a murderer desperate enough to kill repeatedly in order to preserve the truth. "You intend to advertise possession of the ledger?" I asked. "Precisely." Holmes lounged in his armchair, apparently unconcerned. "To whom?" "Everyone." I stared. "Everyone? The wider the audience, the better." "That seems remarkably reckless." Holmes smiled. "My dear Watson, if one wishes to catch a fish, one must place bait in the water." "Yes, but one generally avoids becoming the bait." His laughter echoed through the room. A valid observation. Despite his amusement, I remained troubled. The danger seemed obvious. The moment news of the ledger became public, every individual threatened by its contents might react. Some would panic, others would flee. One, perhaps, would attempt murder. Unfortunately, that final possibility appeared to be precisely what Holmes desired. The following morning, Holmes set his plan into motion. By means I never entirely understood, he ensured that information regarding the ledger reached several influential circles, not enough to reveal its contents, merely enough to establish that it existed and that Sherlock Holmes possessed it. The effect was almost immediate. Before noon, 3 visitors arrived at Baker Street. The first was a prominent barrister whose name appeared within the ledger. The second was a retired politician. The third was an industrialist of considerable wealth. All expressed concern, all attempted subtle inquiries, and all departed dissatisfied. Holmes regarded these encounters with obvious amusement. "They are frightened." "Naturally," I replied. "Good. You enjoy this." "Immensely." By evening, another consequence emerged. We received 2 anonymous telegrams. The first offered a substantial sum of money in exchange for the ledger. The second contained a threat: destroy the book or suffer the consequences. Holmes framed the message above the mantelpiece. "Holmes? What? Surely you do not intend to keep that there?" "Why not?" "Because someone threatened your life." He examined the telegram thoughtfully. "The wording lacks imagination." I sighed. "You are impossible." I have heard that criticism before. The most significant reaction arrived shortly after midnight. A stone shattered the sitting-room window. Glass exploded inward. Mrs. Hudson's alarmed voice echoed from below. I immediately sprang to my feet. Holmes, however, remained seated. Interesting. The stone had carried a note attached by string. I retrieved it. The message consisted of only 5 words. "Return what belongs to me." No signature appeared. No indication of the sender. Yet Holmes seemed genuinely pleased. "You expected this?" "Not precisely." "But something similar?" "Certainly." He examined the note. Then his smile widened. "What have you discovered?" "The writer is becoming impatient." I frowned. "How can you tell?" Holmes held up the paper. "The previous communications were carefully planned." "Yes." "The language was measured." "Agreed." He tapped the note. "This message is emotional." The distinction seemed minor. To Holmes, however, it clearly mattered. "Emotion creates mistakes," he said quietly, "and mistakes create opportunities." The following afternoon brought a development of even greater significance. Inspector Lestrade arrived bearing unexpected news. "We found something." Holmes immediately became attentive. "What?" "A body." The room grew silent. "Whose?" "We don't know." "Where?" "Whitechapel." The answer produced no immediate reaction. Then Lestrade removed a photograph. The moment Holmes saw it, his expression changed. For the first time in days, genuine surprise appeared. "What is it?" I asked. Instead of answering, he handed me the image. The face belonged to an elderly man, weathered, thin, bearded. At first glance, he appeared entirely unfamiliar. Then I noticed a notation written on the reverse. Possible identification, Adrian Faulkner. My pulse quickened. "The professor." "Possibly," said Lestrade. "The age fits." Holmes examined the photograph again. "Where was he found?" "A lodging house." "Cause of death?" "Unknown." For several moments Holmes remained silent. Then he stood abruptly. "We leave immediately." The lodging house occupied a narrow street, crowded between warehouses and tenements. Its proprietor led us upstairs. The gentleman rented a room under the name Arthur Gray. Holmes nodded. "When did he arrive?" 3 months ago." "And he died?" "Yesterday." The room itself was modest. A bed, a table, a chair. Nothing remarkable. At least, nothing remarkable until Holmes began searching. Within minutes, he discovered a locked box concealed beneath a loose floorboard. The proprietor insisted he had never seen it before. Holmes forced the lock. Inside rested several documents, letters, receipts, notes, and one faded photograph. The image depicted a much younger Adrian Faulkner. There could be no doubt. The dead man was indeed the professor. For nearly 30 years he had remained hidden, and now he was dead. Lestrade examined the photograph. "So, Faulkner survived?" "Yes," said Holmes quietly. The inspector frowned. "I don't understand." Neither did I. Holmes studied the contents of the box. Then his expression hardened. "What is it?" Without answering, he handed me a folded letter. The handwriting appeared old, very old. The signature at the bottom caused my breath to catch. Nathaniel Kerr. I looked up sharply. Kerr wrote this. Indeed, the letter appeared decades old. Its contents proved astonishing. Faulkner, you promised the truth would remain buried. If Thorne continues demanding money, I shall speak. I care nothing for scandal any longer. N. Kerr silence filled the room. The implications were immense. Kerr had known Faulkner personally. More importantly, he had feared Thorne's activities, perhaps even opposed them. Holmes folded the letter carefully. The relationship was far more complicated than we believed. Lestrade looked bewildered. Can someone explain what any of this means? Holmes smiled faintly. In due course, the inspector groaned. I dislike that phrase. You are not alone. Back at Baker Street that evening, Holmes spent hours reviewing Faulkner's documents. I watched as he arranged papers across the table in increasingly complex patterns. Finally, shortly before midnight, he stopped. His expression had changed. The look of uncertainty that had accompanied parts of the investigation was gone. In its place stood conviction. Absolute conviction. You know, Holmes nodded. I do. For a moment I simply stared. After weeks of investigation, after murders, disappearances, and secrets spanning decades, the mystery had finally yielded. The killer, yes. And the truth about Thorne, yes. And the letters, all of it. I rose from my chair. Then tell me. Holmes shook his head. Not yet. My frustration must have been obvious. He laughed softly. Patience, Watson. You have said that for years, and you continue requiring the advice. I could not deny it. Holmes moved toward the fireplace. The final proof remains outstanding. What proof? The murderer must act. You are certain he will? Completely. His confidence was astonishing. What makes you so sure? Holmes picked up the ledger. The same reason a starving man reaches for food. He placed the book inside a leather case. Our adversary believes this volume threatens everything. Because it does. Exactly. He looked toward the darkened window. And tomorrow night, Watson, we shall give him one final opportunity to recover it. A chill passed through me. The trap was ready. The bait had been placed. The pieces were arranged. All that remained was for the murderer to make his move, and judging by Holmes's expression, he fully expected that move to come very soon. What neither of us knew was that the following night would bring not only the attempted theft of the ledger, but the first direct confrontation with the killer himself. Chapter 10. The Shadow in Baker Street. The day upon which Holmes intended to spring his trap dawned beneath a blanket of dense London fog. From the windows of Baker Street, the city appeared transformed into a landscape of shifting shadows and muted sounds. Omnibuses emerged from the mist like phantom vessels. Footsteps echoed without visible owners. Even the familiar houses across the street seemed distant and unreal. To Holmes, however, the weather represented an advantage. Fog encourages confidence, he observed during breakfast. In whom? In criminals. I lowered my newspaper. Why? Because they mistake concealment for safety. He smiled faintly. A dangerous error. Despite his outward calm, I could detect signs of excitement beneath the surface. His violin remained untouched. His chemical apparatuses sat abandoned. Even his habitual lounging had disappeared. Every indication suggested that his mind was wholly concentrated upon the coming evening. And, if Holmes was correct, the evening promised to bring the investigation to its decisive stage. Throughout the day, Holmes continued cultivating the illusion that the ledger remained inside Baker Street. Several carefully chosen remarks found their way into the proper ears. A messenger carried a package conspicuously labelled with Holmes's name. Another visitor departed after overhearing a conversation he was clearly intended to overhear. The performance was elaborate and remarkably convincing. By sunset, Half of London likely believed the infamous ledger rested securely within our sitting room. In reality, Holmes had placed it elsewhere. Where precisely, he refused to tell me. "Not even you?" I protested. "Especially not you." The answer seemed absurd, yet I recognized the wisdom behind it. If I did not know the hiding place, I could not accidentally reveal it. Still, the situation left me feeling somewhat insulted. Holmes appeared entirely untroubled by my annoyance. At 9 o'clock that evening, Inspector Lestrade arrived with 2 plainclothes officers. Their instructions were simple: remain hidden, observe, intervene only when signalled. The officers concealed themselves in adjoining rooms. Lestrade occupied a position near the staircase. Holmes and I remained within the sitting room. The trap was set. All that remained was to wait. Waiting, I have often found, constitutes one of the most difficult aspects of detective work. Hours may pass, nothing happens. Yet tension accumulates steadily until even the smallest sound acquires significance. Such was the atmosphere within Baker Street that night. The fire crackled softly. The clock ticked. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and gradually midnight approached. Shortly after 11, Holmes suddenly raised a hand. "Listen." I strained my ears. At first I heard nothing. Then came a faint sound, a footstep, somewhere below. Another followed, then silence. The sound had been deliberate, careful, the movement of someone attempting not to be heard. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The game had begun. Several minutes passed, then a second sound emerged, this time from the rear of the house. A window, very gently opened. The noise lasted scarcely a second, yet it was unmistakable. Someone had entered. I glanced toward Holmes. His expression remained perfectly calm. Only the brightness of his eyes betrayed his anticipation. More silence followed. The intruder was moving cautiously, methodically, like a man familiar with risk. At length a shadow appeared beneath the sitting-room door. Someone stood outside, waiting, listening. Then the handle began to turn, slowly, very slowly. The door opened. A figure slipped inside. The intruder wore dark clothing. A scarf concealed much of the face. The posture suggested confidence, experience, purpose. For several moments the figure remained motionless. Then it moved toward Holmes's desk, toward the place where the ledger was believed to be hidden. The room remained dark, save for the glow of the dying fire. The intruder searched quickly, efficiently. Eyes opened. Papers shifted. Nothing was found. The search intensified. A chair overturned. Books were examined. Still nothing. Then Holmes spoke. "Good evening." The effect was extraordinary. The intruder froze. Absolute stillness. For a moment neither party moved. Then Holmes lit a lamp. Golden light flooded the room. The stranger stood exposed, a tall man, grey-haired, thin. The scarf concealed most of his features, yet I immediately sensed his shock. "You appear disappointed," Holmes remarked. The intruder said nothing. Looking for something. Silence. Holmes remained seated, remarkably relaxed. "I regret to inform you that the ledger is not here." At last the stranger spoke. The voice was rough, carefully controlled. "Where is it?" Holmes smiled. "There we differ." The man stiffened. "Because I know where it is." For the first time uncertainty appeared, only briefly, but enough. Holmes had seen it, so had I. The intruder had expected fear. Instead he encountered confidence, and confidence unsettled him. The confrontation might have ended there. Unfortunately, events took a more dramatic turn. Without warning, the stranger lunged toward the fireplace. His hand emerged holding a revolver. The movement occurred with astonishing speed. I instinctively reached for my own weapon, yet Holmes remained seated. "Please don't." The calmness of his voice was remarkable. The stranger aimed directly at him. "Tell me where the ledger is." "No." The revolver remained steady. Holmes appeared almost bored. "I advise against this." The stranger laughed harshly. You advise? Yes. Why? Holmes folded his hands. Because your position is hopeless. For a moment, the man hesitated. Then came a sharp whistle. Immediately doors burst open throughout the house. Lestrade, 2 officers, myself. All moved simultaneously. The stranger spun. Too late. Within seconds he found himself surrounded. The revolver slipped from his hand. It struck the carpet. Silence followed. The trap had closed. Lestrade stepped forward triumphantly. Got you. The stranger said nothing. His gaze remained fixed upon Holmes, not fearfully, not angrily, curiously, almost sadly. The reaction surprised me. Holmes observed it as well. You are not the killer. The room became utterly silent. Lestrade stared. What? The stranger closed his eyes. For a moment, genuine relief appeared upon his face. Then he laughed softly. I wondered how long it would take. Lestrade looked bewildered. What nonsense is this? Holmes rose. The man before us attempted theft. He pointed toward the prisoner. But he did not murder Bellamy. Or Reed. No. Or Blackwood. No. The inspector's confusion deepened. Then who is he? The stranger slowly removed the scarf from his face. I recognized him immediately. Sir Alistair Fenwick. For several seconds no one spoke. The revelation struck the room like a thunderclap. Fenwick! The industrialist nodded wearily. Good evening, Doctor. Lestrade stared in disbelief. You broke into Baker Street? Yes. Why? Fenwick lowered his gaze. The ledger. Holmes nodded. As expected. The industrialist laughed bitterly. Of course you expected it. Indeed. You always seemed to. Holmes studied him carefully. You wanted the book destroyed. Yes. Because of what it contains. Yes. The answers came without resistance, without hesitation. The behavior puzzled me. This was not the reaction of a cornered murderer. This was the reaction of a tired man carrying an unbearable burden. Holmes seemed to recognize it as well. You feared exposure. Fenwick nodded. More than death. The room remained silent. Then Holmes asked the question that changed everything. Tell me, Sir Alistair. The industrialist looked up. Where is Nathaniel Kerr? For the first time all evening, genuine fear crossed Fenwick's face. Not surprise. Not confusion, fear, a deep and immediate fear. And in that instant Holmes received the answer he had been seeking. The industrialist whispered only 3 words. 3 words that transformed the entire investigation. He's still alive. The silence that followed seemed almost tangible. Even Lestrade appeared stunned. Nathaniel Kerr, the vanished student, the presumed ghost haunting the edges of the case. Alive. After 27 years. Alive. And somewhere beyond Baker Street, hidden within the darkness of London, the final player in the mystery was waiting. The true confrontation had not yet occurred. In fact, Holmes's trap had revealed something far more dangerous than a killer. It had revealed that the man everyone believed lost to history was still part of the game, and according to Sir Alistair Fenwick, Nathaniel Kerr had never stopped playing. Chapter 11. The Man Who Never Disappeared. The revelation that Nathaniel Kerr still lived produced one of the most extraordinary moments of the entire investigation. For weeks we had treated Kerr as a phantom, a vanished figure, a distant possibility, a name attached to old records and forgotten memories. Now, in a single sentence, Sir Alistair Fenwick had transformed him into something very different. A living man, a present danger, and, perhaps, the central figure around whom every event revolved. For several moments after Fenwick's declaration, no one spoke. The silence within Baker Street seemed almost oppressive. At length Holmes broke it. You are certain? Fenwick laughed bitterly. Completely. Then you have seen him? Yes. When? The industrialist hesitated. Then, with visible reluctance, he answered, 3 months ago. I stared. 3 months. Holmes remained remarkably calm. "Tell us everything." Fenwick lowered himself into a chair. The struggle seemed to drain him. For years he had carried secrets. Now they were finally escaping. And with each revelation, the burden appeared to grow lighter. "It happened at my country estate," he began. "I received a letter." "The Black Seal?" Holmes asked. "No." Fenwick shook his head. "This one carried no seal at all." "From Kerr?" "Yes." "What did it say?" The industrialist looked toward the fire. "Meet me." "Nothing more." "Only a location." Holmes folded his arms. "And you went?" "Of course." "Why?" A hollow smile crossed Fenwick's face. "Because I had spent 27 years expecting that letter." The answer seemed entirely sincere. Holmes nodded. "Continue." Fenwick swallowed. He looked older. "Naturally." "No." The industrialist shook his head again. "You misunderstand." His voice had become strangely subdued. He looked broken. Those words lingered in the room. Not dangerous, not threatening. Broken. The description felt oddly significant. "What did he want?" Holmes asked. Fenwick stared into the flames. "The truth." For a moment, no one moved. Then Holmes spoke softly. "Whose truth?" "Thorne's." The familiar name once again settled over the room like a shadow. The dead man remained at the center of everything, even after 27 years. Fenwick continued. "Kerr believed someone had altered history." "Someone had," Holmes observed. "Yes." The industrialist nodded. "And he intended to prove it." "How?" "The ledger." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Everything returned to the ledger. The hidden record. The catalogue of secrets. The object for which men had killed and died. Kerr knew it still existed, Fenwick said. He never stopped looking. "Did he find it?" I asked. "No." "Then why contact you?" Fenwick's expression darkened. "Because he believed I had it." A strange irony emerged. For years, Kerr searched for the ledger. Then Holmes found it first. The coincidence seemed almost unbelievable. Yet the consequences had proven deadly. "Where is Kerr now?" Holmes asked. Fenwick hesitated. "I don't know." "You truly don't know?" "Yes." Holmes studied him carefully, then nodded, apparently satisfied. The interrogation continued for nearly an hour. By its conclusion, several important facts had emerged. Kerr had indeed survived. He had spent decades moving from place to place. He rarely used his real name. And he remained obsessed with uncovering the truth regarding Thorne's death. Yet one detail troubled Holmes considerably. "What happened after your meeting?" Fenwick looked away. "We argued." "About what?" "The past." "And?" The industrialist sighed. "He accused me." "Of murder?" "No." The answer surprised everyone. "Then of what?" Fenwick's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Cowardice." The word seemed oddly powerful. Holmes remained silent. Fenwick continued. "He said the death itself was terrible." His hands tightened, but what happened afterward was worse. The room fell quiet once more, and for the first time I began to suspect that Thorne's death represented only part of the mystery. Perhaps the greater crime lay elsewhere, in concealment, in betrayal, in the deliberate rewriting of events. After Fenwick departed, Holmes remained awake long into the night. I found him shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning, standing before the fireplace. The ledger rested open upon the mantel. "You've discovered something?" "Yes." "What?" He pointed toward a section I had previously overlooked. A series of entries written shortly before Thorne's death. Most concerned money, meetings, threats. Then one line caught my attention. "Kerr refuses participation." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Holmes smiled faintly. "It means Nathaniel Kerr was different." "Different how?" He objected. "To blackmail?" "Perhaps." Holmes closed the ledger. "Or to something even worse." The answer deepened the mystery. If Kerr opposed Thorne's activities, why had he remained associated with the others? And why had he vanished afterward? The contradictions multiplied. Yet Holmes seemed increasingly certain, not confused, certain. The distinction encouraged me. The following afternoon brought the breakthrough. It arrived through a source neither of us expected, Professor Faulkner's papers. Among the documents recovered from the lodging house, Holmes discovered a sealed envelope hidden within the lining of a coat. The concealment was ingenious, so ingenious that even Holmes appeared impressed. Inside rested a single handwritten statement, signed by Adrian Faulkner, dated 1 week before his death. For several moments Holmes simply read, then read again. Finally, he handed it to me. The contents stunned me. To whoever finds this, if I am dead, then the past has finally returned. Nathaniel was innocent. The words seemed to leap from the page. Nathaniel was innocent. I read them again and again. The meaning remained unchanged. Kerr, the prime suspect, the mysterious survivor, the man haunting every corner of the case. Innocent. My pulse quickened. What does this mean? Holmes's eyes shone. It means we have misunderstood the entire affair. He took back the statement. Continue reading. I obeyed. The next lines proved even more astonishing. Thorne was not killed by Nathaniel Kerr. He attempted to stop what happened. If justice exists, let the truth finally be known. A. Faulkner. For several moments I could not speak. The implications were enormous. If Faulkner told the truth, then Kerr had not caused Thorne's death. In fact, he had tried to prevent it. Everything changed. Every assumption, every suspicion, every conclusion. Holmes appeared almost exhilarated. The final pieces? You're certain? Almost. The answer carried unusual confidence. We were approaching the end. I could feel it. That evening, Holmes spread every document across the sitting room. The ledger, the witness register, the letters, the photographs, the statements. Each occupied a precise position. A map of truth emerging from chaos. For over an hour, Holmes moved among them, comparing dates, cross-referencing names, tracing connections. Then suddenly he stopped, completely stopped. A remarkable stillness settled over him. I recognized it immediately, the moment of realization, the instant when every fragment aligned. Holmes. No response. Holmes. At last he looked up. His expression had changed. The puzzle was solved. I knew it before he spoke a single word. You know? Yes. The answer came quietly. But this time, Watson, the solution is uglier than I expected. A chill ran through me. Why? Holmes moved toward the window. London lay hidden beneath fog, a city of secrets, a city of shadows. The murders were committed for one reason. What reason? Not greed, not revenge, no. His voice became grave. Fear. The words seemed to echo through the room. Fear, not wealth, not power. Fear, the oldest motive of all. Shortly before midnight, a messenger arrived. He carried no letter, no package. Only a message, verbal, direct, for Sherlock Holmes. The messenger repeated the words exactly as instructed. He says he knows you found the ledger. Holmes became very still. Go on. And he says the game is over. The messenger hesitated. That's all. No name? The man shook his head. No, sir. After he departed, silence filled Baker Street. At length I spoke. Kerr? Holmes smiled faintly. Perhaps. You don't think so? No. Why? He picked up his violin. The first notes drifted softly through the room. Melancholy. Reflective. Almost sorrowful. Then he answered, Because, Watson, I finally know who sent the black-sealed letters. My pulse quickened. And Holmes lowered the bow. For the first time since the investigation began, he spoke the words I had waited weeks to hear. And tomorrow, I intend to arrest him. Outside, the fog thickened around Baker Street. Somewhere in London, a murderer believed victory remained possible. Somewhere in London, A secret buried for 27 years stood on the verge of exposure, and somewhere in London, the final confrontation was already beginning. The next day would bring answers about Thorne, about Faulkner, about Kerr, and about the black-sealed letters that had left a trail of death across 2 cities and nearly 3 decades. The end of the mystery had arrived. Only the revelation remained. Chapter 12. The Gathering of Shadows. The morning that followed Holmes's astonishing declaration arrived grey and cold. A steady rain drifted across London, coating the streets in a glistening sheen and turning the city into a maze of reflections and shadows. I awoke earlier than usual. The events of the previous evening had made sleep difficult. For weeks we had pursued clues scattered across 2 cities and nearly 3 decades. Now Holmes claimed not only to understand the mystery, but to know the identity of the man responsible for the murders. And yet he had still refused to reveal that identity. When I descended to the sitting room, I found him already awake. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. The ledger rested upon the table. Beside it lay the black-sealed letters. Every piece of evidence collected throughout the case had been arranged in meticulous order. "Good morning," I said. "Morning, Watson. You slept?" "No, of course not." A faint smile crossed his face. "I rarely sleep before the conclusion of an interesting case." I poured myself coffee. "And today is the conclusion?" "Today is the beginning of the conclusion," I groaned. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." Holmes laughed softly. "It also happens to be true." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a visiting card. Holmes glanced at it. "Excellent. Who is it?" I asked. "The first guest." "Guest?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Watson, I should be grateful if you remained available this afternoon." I stared. "You are assembling everyone." "Precisely." The realization struck me immediately. The classic Holmesian ending, the gathering, the confrontation, the final unveiling. For years I had witnessed such scenes, yet the anticipation never diminished. "Who will be present?" Holmes picked up the card. "Sir Alistair Fenwick." "And?" "Inspector Lestrade." "Who else?" Holmes smiled. "Everyone who still has a role to play." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Baker Street had become unusually crowded. Lestrade arrived first. The inspector appeared deeply sceptical. Whenever Holmes announced dramatic revelations, Lestrade generally expected equal measures of brilliance and frustration. On this occasion, his expression suggested both. "Well?" he asked immediately. "Patience." "I dislike patience." "I know," the inspector sighed. "Then tell me who did it." "Shortly." "I dislike Shortly as well." Holmes appeared delighted by this. Fenwick arrived next. The industrialist looked exhausted. Days of anxiety had clearly taken their toll. Yet another guest surprised me considerably. A thin, elderly gentleman entered shortly afterward. His beard had turned almost entirely white. His posture suggested years of hardship, yet his eyes remained sharp. The moment I saw Holmes greet him, I understood. Nathaniel Kerr, alive, at last. The vanished student had finally emerged from the shadows. For several moments Fenwick simply stared at him. Neither spoke. 27 years of history occupied the silence between them. Then Kerr nodded once. Fenwick returned the gesture. Nothing more. The exchange seemed strangely sad. Not hostile, not angry, simply sad, as though both men understood the terrible cost of the past. When everyone had assembled, Holmes closed the sitting-room door. The room fell silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows, the fire crackled, and Sherlock Holmes stepped forward. "My friends," he began, "the mystery before us has been complicated by 3 murders, 1 attempted murder, numerous acts of deception, and a remarkable amount of selective memory." Lestrade shifted impatiently. Holmes ignored him. The central question has never been who killed Elias Thorne. That statement immediately attracted everyone's attention, because Thorne's death occurred 27 years ago. Holmes picked up the ledger. The real mystery concerns what happened afterward. Nathaniel Kerr slowly nodded. Holmes continued. Elias Thorne was a blackmailer. No surprise there, muttered Lestrade. Indeed, Holmes opened the ledger. However, Thorne did not act alone. Silence settled over the room. He worked with another man. Holmes allowed the words to linger. A man respected by society. A man who helped gather secrets. A man who profited from fear. Professor Faulkner, I said. Holmes nodded. Precisely. Kerr closed his eyes. The name clearly still carried painful memories. Together they operated a sophisticated blackmail enterprise. Holmes turned a page. Many victims paid. Many suffered. Eventually Thorne became reckless. The detective's voice grew quieter. He began threatening the wrong people. Fenwick lowered his head. The implication was obvious. One of those people had been connected to the Edinburgh affair. Holmes crossed to the fireplace. On the night Thorne died, 5 people were present. He looked toward Kerr. Not 4. The elderly man nodded. Professor Faulkner accompanied the students. Exactly. Holmes turned back toward the room. What followed was not a planned murder. The statement surprised everyone, even Lestrade. Thorne threatened exposure. Holmes continued. Arguments erupted. Voices were raised. Accusations exchanged. The detective's gaze settled upon Kerr. And then Thorne attempted something unexpected. Kerr spoke for the first time. His voice sounded rough with age. He tried to flee. Holmes nodded. Yes. The room remained silent. Thorne ran toward the staircase. Professor Faulkner followed. And? Lestrade asked. Holmes's expression hardened, and Faulkner struck him. No one moved. The answer seemed almost too simple. Yet Holmes continued, not with the intention of killing him, merely stopping him. The detective pointed toward the staircase sketch he had prepared. Unfortunately, Thorne lost his footing. The room remained utterly silent. He fell. The truth finally emerged. Not murder, not accident, something between. A moment of violence, a moment of panic, a moment that destroyed multiple lives. Nathaniel Kerr spoke quietly. I told them we had to tell the truth. Holmes nodded. You did? The old man's gaze drifted toward Fenwick. None of us wanted prison. Fenwick looked away. No, you especially. The industrialist said nothing. Kerr continued. Then Faulkner made his proposal. Holmes folded his arms. The cover-up. Yes. The word carried enormous weight. There it was. The true crime, not the fall, the concealment, the deliberate burial of truth, the alteration of records, the disappearance of names, the manipulation of evidence, 27 years of lies. Holmes looked toward me. That is why Kerr vanished. Understanding dawned immediately. He refused to participate. Precisely. Kerr had not disappeared because he was guilty. He had disappeared because he could not endure what followed. Lestrade frowned. Very touching. The inspector leaned forward. But none of this explains the recent murders. Holmes smiled. Quite right. The room grew still. At last, the final question, the question that had haunted the investigation from the beginning. Who killed Bellamy? Who killed Reed? Who poisoned Blackwood? Who sent the black-sealed letters? Holmes picked up one of the envelopes. The answer lies here. He examined the black wax seal, then looked toward Fenwick. Sir Alistair, the industrialist stiffened. For a moment I believed Holmes intended to accuse him. Instead, the detective shook his head. You were not the murderer. Fenwick exhaled slowly. Relief flooded his face. Holmes then turned. His eyes settled upon another man. A man who had remained almost invisible throughout the investigation. Inspector Lestrade suddenly sat upright. Realization flashed across his features. No, Holmes nodded slowly. Yes. The room became utterly silent, and for the first time since the mystery began, Sherlock Holmes prepared to name the true killer. Yet before he could speak, the man in question made his move, with astonishing speed, and the final chapter of the mystery began. Chapter 13. The Poisoned Letter Revealed. For a single frozen instant after Holmes uttered those words, no one in the room moved. Rain whispered against the windows. The fire crackled softly. Every eye turned toward the man upon whom Holmes's gaze had settled. Then chaos erupted. The suspect sprang from his chair. A hand plunged inside a coat. A revolver flashed into view. Mrs. Hudson later remarked that the entire incident seemed to occur in less than a second. My own recollection is somewhat different. Moments of extreme danger often appear strangely elongated. I remember Lestrade shouting. I remember Fenwick rising abruptly. I remember Nathaniel Kerr's expression of astonishment. Most vividly of all, I remember Sherlock Holmes. He did not move. Not immediately. Instead, he smiled. The smile of a man whose final prediction has just been confirmed. The suspect took one step toward the door, then another. But Holmes had anticipated everything. Before the man reached the handle, Lestrade launched himself forward. The revolver discharged. The report echoed through Baker Street like a cannon blast. Glass shattered, a lamp overturned. Then the struggle ended. 2 officers pinned the suspect to the floor. The weapon skidded harmlessly across the carpet. Silence followed, broken only by heavy breathing. Holmes calmly adjusted his cuffs. "Thank you, Inspector." Lestrade rose, flushed and furious. "You knew he would run." "Naturally." The inspector stared at the prisoner, then at Holmes, then back again. "My God!" The prisoner slowly closed his eyes. The game was over. The man's name was Percival Hodge, Sir Alistair Fenwick's trusted manager, the same nervous administrator who had greeted us during our first visit to Fenwick's offices, the same man who had discovered Arthur Bellamy's body, the same man who had remained consistently present while attracting almost no suspicion. A classic position from which to operate. Invisible. Trusted. Overlooked. Hodge looked suddenly much older than I remembered. His shoulders sagged. Years of carefully maintained composure appeared to collapse all at once. Lestrade stared at him. "You?" The manager laughed softly, a bitter sound. "That's usually the reaction." Holmes folded his arms. "It is difficult to suspect a man whom everyone ignores." The prisoner said nothing. Holmes continued, "Particularly when he encourages others to look elsewhere." At last, Hodge raised his head. His expression contained neither hatred nor fear, only exhaustion. "You worked it out." "Several days ago." The manager nodded slowly. "I thought you might." Holmes stepped forward. "The murders began with Arthur Bellamy." He picked up the ledger. Bellamy discovered the truth about his father. The detective looked around the room. Dr. Samuel Bellamy was not merely connected to Thorne. He was one of Thorne's victims. Nathaniel Kerr nodded grimly. Holmes continued. Arthur Bellamy inherited his father's papers. While examining them, he discovered references to the Edinburgh affair. Then he began investigating. The detective turned toward Hodge. "And that investigation alarmed you?" The prisoner smiled faintly. "Yes." "Because Bellamy discovered something nobody was supposed to find." "Yes." The answer came quietly, almost peacefully. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The missing page. The smile vanished. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed Hodge's face. Not fear, pain. Deep pain. Yes. The room grew silent. Holmes continued. Bellamy found evidence concerning the torn page. He learned the identity of the person recorded there. More importantly, he learned why that person had been removed. The detective paused. Shortly afterward, Bellamy died. No one spoke. The implications were obvious. Lestrade folded his arms. But why? The question hung in the air. Why kill? Why continue killing? Why preserve a secret for 27 years? Holmes answered, because the missing page contained a name. The detective looked directly at Hodge, a name he could not allow anyone to discover. The prisoner's gaze dropped. Holmes continued, not Faulkner. No, not Kerr. No. The detective's voice softened. It contained the name of your father. For several seconds no one moved. Even Lestrade appeared stunned. My father, Hodge repeated quietly. Holmes nodded. Your father was the sixth figure. The sixth figure in the photograph. The supposedly dead young man. The impossible figure Holmes had noticed weeks earlier. Suddenly everything aligned. The room remained utterly silent. My father worked for Thorne, Hodge said. Yes. Thorne destroyed him. Yes. The prisoner's hands trembled slightly. He ruined our family. No one interrupted. For years, Hodge had carried this story alone. Now it finally emerged. Holmes spoke quietly. Your father discovered the blackmail operation. He attempted to expose it. Instead, he was silenced. The prisoner nodded. Everyone believed he died, but he survived. Yes, the answer came almost as a whisper. The mystery of the sixth figure finally made sense. The young man officially listed as dead had not died at all. His death had been falsified. His existence erased, just as Faulkner's had later been erased. Another victim of the cover-up, another casualty of fear. My father spent years hiding. Hodge stared into the fire. Years. The room remained silent. He never recovered. The prisoner's voice broke slightly. He lost everything. Holmes nodded. And before his death, he told you the truth. Yes. The single word seemed to contain decades of grief. The explanation continued. Arthur Bellamy discovered the connection, Holmes said. He began searching for evidence. He found traces of the missing page. He found references to your father. And you panicked. The prisoner laughed bitterly. Wouldn't you? No one answered. Because in truth, the question required no answer. Fear. Holmes had identified the motive days earlier. Fear. Not greed. Not revenge. Fear. The fear that history would finally emerge. The fear that old wounds would reopen. The fear that long-buried secrets would destroy what remained of a life. And Malcolm Reed? Lestrade asked. Holmes nodded. Reed intended to confess. The recovered impressions from the letter, the unfinished statement, the message in his dying hand, all returned to significance. He knew the truth. He wanted to reveal it. Hodge closed his eyes. Yes. And Blackwood? The prisoner's expression darkened. Blackwood remembered my father. The answer came immediately. Too immediately. A confession. He recognized the name. He understood what Bellamy had discovered. The room fell silent again. Each murder suddenly seemed tragically simple. Not random, not elaborate. Merely desperate attempts to stop the truth from spreading. One death leading inevitably to another. Fear breeding fear, until murder became routine. At last Holmes picked up one of the black-sealed letters, the final piece. He examined the envelope. The poisoned letter. Lestrade frowned. What poison? Holmes smiled faintly. A clever one. The detective turned toward me. Do you remember the stain recovered from Bellamy's office? Of course. The tincture. Yes. Holmes nodded. The poison was applied to the envelope seal. A murmur passed through the room. The simplicity was astonishing. The victim moistens a finger, breaks the seal, absorbs a minute quantity. The detective held up the envelope, enough to induce symptoms resembling natural failure. I stared. Extraordinary, indeed. Holmes placed the letter upon the table. A brilliant method. The prisoner managed a faint smile. My father taught chemistry. The statement explained everything. The poisoned letters, the mysterious deaths, the apparent natural causes, every detail. Finally, Holmes stepped back. The mystery stood complete. Every clue, every death, every lie, every secret. 27 years of deception, reduced to a single coherent narrative. The room remained silent. No one seemed eager to speak. Perhaps because the truth felt less satisfying than expected. No criminal empire, no grand conspiracy, no brilliant mastermind. Merely damaged people making disastrous decisions. One lie creating another. One concealment creating 10 more. Until death became unavoidable. At length Nathaniel Kerr rose. The elderly man's face appeared weary. "So that's it," Holmes nodded. "Yes." Kerr looked toward Hodge. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then Kerr quietly said, "You should have come to me." The prisoner laughed softly. "Maybe. You didn't need to kill them." "No." The answer came immediately. Without argument, without excuse. No, he didn't. And perhaps that was the saddest part of all. Later that evening, after the police had departed and the house had grown quiet once more, Holmes and I sat alone beside the fire. The rain had finally stopped. London lay silent beyond the windows. The case was finished. At last, I watched Holmes refill his pipe. "What became of the ledger?" "It will be delivered to the proper authorities." "And the names within it?" Holmes shrugged. "Some truths deserve daylight." The answer seemed characteristic. For several minutes we sat in silence. Then I asked the question that had lingered in my mind throughout the entire affair. "Do you think justice was done?" Holmes considered carefully. At length he answered, "Partially." "Only partially," he nodded. "The law will deal with Hodge. But," Holmes stared into the fire, "the real crime occurred 27 years ago. The cover-up, the silence, the fear, the decision that changed countless lives. I understood immediately. At length Holmes smiled faintly. "A curious case, Watson. Very. The poisoned letter from Edinburgh." I laughed softly. "A title worthy of publication." Holmes waved dismissively. "My dear fellow, if you insist upon writing it, at least omit the portions that make me appear overly theatrical." I looked at him, then at the shattered window, then at the revolver mark in the wall. "That may prove difficult." For the first time in days, Holmes laughed. And as the fire burned low and the shadows lengthened across Baker Street, another remarkable mystery passed into history. One more case, one more lesson, and one more reminder that the most dangerous poisons are not always chemical. Sometimes they are secrets.